Connecting people to the work is the why behind the what. Connecting people to each other, those are those personal stories. Creating time and space as a leader for people to get to know each other, not what they do, but who they are. When you do that as a leader, you learn things about your team that you will never learn on an engagement survey. You will never learn in their interview because you're going over their resume. That is what they do, but you learn who they are. When you learn what drives them and makes them tick, when you're in the trenches, you can dial those things up and say, hey, I know you are big on transparency. That is part of something you value. So we have to do X, Y, Z because that's going to give the customer a real clear sense of what they're getting from us. All of a sudden, they are personally engaged.
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today, I got to chat with Danielle Krischik. Danielle is a keynote speaker, best-selling author of The Story Effect, How Storytelling Creates Connection and Drives Performance, and host of the Story Effect podcast. She's also a partner at Night Agency, a marketing company based in Orlando and Kansas City. Her work sits at the intersection of story strategy, leadership, and performance, helping companies bring their vision, values, and leadership to life in ways people actually feel, turning strategy into belief and belief into results. Danielle has worked with Fortune 500 companies and rising entrepreneurs, guiding leaders to use storytelling not as a communication tactic, but as a connection strategy. As a former ballerina, Danielle still takes the stage, now helping audiences understand how stories shape belief, influence behavior, and drive performance in and outside organizations. I can't wait for you to hear more. All right, Danielle. Well, thank you for being here. I'm super excited to have you. We talked, I don't even know how long ago, maybe a year ago or so, when you first launched your podcast, which was super awesome, and grateful for you having me. And now I get to have you and hear all the things that about your journey and vibes and your book and all the exciting things you've been up to. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm a major fangirl of yours. So this is cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's awesome. Well, I have a funny story on that. So, I do this podcast before we get into it. I do this podcast as really a passion project. Like, I just love talking to people and hearing stories and understanding like what makes things good and bad that are simple, right? And so I was talking to somebody, this is probably 6 months ago now, a potential client that was referred to me through a friend. And she's like, I got to tell you, I listen to every single one of your podcasts. And she's like, I am a big fan. I called my husband. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a fan. He's like, what? I'm like, you go into these things thinking like, I'm just doing it for me, or like, this is fun. Like, do people actually listen to me? Do people actually like my advice or the advice of the people I have on? And people do. So thank you.
You have a great show. And I think you just revealed the secret to why you're so great. You're doing it for fun. You enjoy it. There's no kind of, I'm sure you have measurables and things you want to achieve, but there's no you're not setting out with the KPIs. You're setting out to do something you're passionate about. Of course, that's going to make you great.
Oh, thank you. The extrovert in me needs to talk to people on the daily, especially working from home.
Yes. Yeah, I get that.
All right. So let's turn it to you. So you, how I always start out all the pods is all my guests defining what a vibe means to them, because I think it just helps ground the conversation throughout. So if you could help me understand, and the listeners, like what it is, what a vibe means to you.
Yes. So it's going to be so on brand for me, but I believe that a vibe is a story or the story told without words. It is the emotional truth of it all.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So good. And we're going to get into like that story piece, right? Of how because people want to know, like, how do I create it? How do I create the vibe? And when you wrap it up in like, it's the energy, it's the feeling, it's the emotion, I think it throws people off because they're like, okay, so I have these emotions, but I can create the vibe through my emotions. But how do I control my like, what? So tell me a little bit before we jump into storytelling, a little bit about your journey to where you are today, and maybe some stories weaved in throughout about how, like, a defining moment, if you will, of like why this became so storytelling became so important to you.
Yeah. So I'm really a human behavior nerd. I have always been fascinated by what makes people tick, why people connect the way they do, why they show up in the world the way they do. And the early part of my career was in advertising. I was a copywriter. And that is all about, creating human behavior to buy a product or service. And that is so fascinating to me. A brand, a brand story told well can literally cause people to stand in a line for, from 5 a.m. in the morning to buy $1,000 phone. Like, what is that? Like, if
For
we
a
really break that
$500
down,
jelly cat.
or jelly cat, my goodness, which I'm not going to lie, they are so cute, by the way.
Yes,
I
they
mean,
are. But oh my gosh, why?
right.
Sorry, didn't mean to throw you off, but
No, but you're emphasizing the point, like a $30 tiny little teddy bear, but we have to have it. We can't see straight until we get it. So that has been so fascinating to me. And what I learned in advertising is you really can, through the power of a story, change people's perception, behavior to the point of breaking out their wallet and purchasing. Like that is, so it leads to action. So as my career evolved, I worked at an agency for a while. I did some freelance work for a while, and then I found Night Agency, and we started to do more of that internal storytelling with companies. So how can we use storytelling to create a sense of belief and connection inside the company? And to me, I think the default is communications. We have a communications department, right? We have a formula, we have a system, we have channels, like make sure we have our newsletter set and all those things. But to me, since I came from advertising, I thought to myself, what if it was as compelling and exciting and entertaining and funny and, enlightening as advertising, but in the inside? And so I started to experiment with that and really realize, oh yeah, if you tell the right story, it has to be true. So I'm not advertising something internally that isn't true, but if you tell the right story, people become engaged, connected to the work they do, the people they work with, their leader, the company. And this swirled around for about a decade. And I started to do unofficial qualitative research where I was using different types of stories in different mediums and channels and with different types of leaders to create connection and drive action and performance. And it just, the culmination of really seeing what works and what doesn't work, I'm like, well, we need to write a book, because while I am paid to be a storyteller, I actually think leaders can do this too. And I think I can teach people to leverage stories for this reason. So
yeah, definitely. And you said something earlier, belief, right? And it's like, I firmly in the deepest part of me believe that if people don't have belief, you can't train a behavior. They have to believe it first, and then they will behave in a certain way. But they can try authentically. I guess people can inauthentically behave in a certain way, but people who have a good like BS radar are going to be like, that is not you. Like, I don't know what you're doing and you're trying. So A for effort, but like your behavior is inconsistent with what you actually believe. And I think that's where mistrust starts to come in, right? Of like in an organization. And then that just leads to a whole bunch of other things. So what was there like a certain or a particular situation where, or defining moment where you were like with a client or in your advertising career or as you were copywriting where you're like, this has to go inside versus just being promoted outside, the storytelling piece of it?
yeah, so definitely the first major campaign I worked on, it was with Starwood Hotels and Resorts. And it was at the time, diversity was evolving into inclusion. So we weren't quite at the belonging level yet, but we were talking about inclusion. And Knight was hired to articulate where the company kind of stood on this diversity and inclusion thing, what they believed and why people should care, and wanted a campaign around that. And we got together and thought, well, instead of, a campaign with, you can picture a poster series with great headlines to tell you kind of what you should think and believe, or we could live it. We could interview 100 people from 100 countries and really ask them about not the initiative, not your career journey, but your personal human story. And so I sat down in Dubai. What the heck? Like, I went to Dubai.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. First time out of the country was in Dubai, by the way. That was crazy. Yes. So wild. And I sat down in this room and I started asking people about their life story. And people that sat in front of me were GMs of hotels. They were housekeepers, the CEO, vice presidents of divisions. I mean, all ranks and levels of the organization, but everyone had this beautiful human story. And I thought to myself, okay, typical scenario is we get these testimonials that are meant to externally share the story of what we believe and who we are in an effort to make the company feel good and attract new talent. But internally, if people knew who the people they were working with were really about, there would be this level of human connection that you cannot manufacture. No matter how good of a writer I am, I cannot connect people the way their real stories could. And then and there, I thought, we are on to something with this. We need to get down to real human storytelling, and we need to figure out how to programmatically do it, scale it, all those things. But it's like I caught the bug and I have not been able to unsee or unlearn that.
Yeah. Okay. Tell me this. Is it hard to convince organizations that this is the right mode, right? Or the right, maybe mode is the wrong term, but the right way to go about engaging and connecting their people internally? Like what do you hit up against sometimes when you're like, hey, we just need to tell the story of who we are and your human, like show the humanness of this organization? Like, what do people say back to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes it's, we present it as people stories, as proof points that what we say and believe as an organization is true. And that works a lot of the time because it's true. You can as an organization, you can create a purpose statement, for example. Okay, we've got our new shiny, beautiful purpose statement, and we're going to etch it into the walls, and we're going to have a town hall, and we're all going to talk about it. But it's not true until there's evidence that it's true. And the evidence comes from the people. So telling, human stories about their experience makes it true. So people stories as proof points usually is a no-brainer. When it comes down to create connection, engagement, performance, it is hard for KPI metrics driven executives to see why it seems like a nice to have. So then we kind of back into the research about how, connected companies do see, an average of, 41% higher profitability, greater quality, greater production. There are metrics that prove that this sense of connection really does lead to business performance. And by the way, it's okay to talk about that. It does provide business outcomes. Yes, it feels good and the vibe feels better and all of those things. Yes, that is all true. But it's okay to say, and it drives business results.
Totally. And I think it's funny because when, the economy shifts and maybe money isn't as fluid, I'll say, or flowing, it's easy to say, oh, we're going to cut this kind of fluffy stuff, which is like when people need it the most. So I think it's super important to include the business outcomes, right? Because it is like what happens without it, right? When you don't have a heart and a soul, what happens to you as a human being? Now think of that in an organization as these stories and connection points as the heart and the soul. What happens, right? It's wild. I've talked to a lot of executives about that too. And they're like, yeah, this is really nice to have, but we don't have time, money, energy, resources, whatever, you name it. We have all these other things to focus on generating revenue. I'm like, you're going to get to your revenue number if you incorporate some of this stuff because you have to, right? Like you have to. Yeah.
That's right. And by the way, you don't have time to do this silly storytelling thing. Fine. But I would argue you don't have time to replace people, onboard people, find good talent, pass best practices. That takes a lot of time and money.
Oh, and
Do.
just like you miss more than you hit on target with some of that kind of stuff, right? Because it's a gamble many times.
That's right. That's right. And I want to differentiate for the listener the story effect, the way that I think about it, it's not just people's stories. It's not just personal stories. It really is an ecosystem of storytelling. So it is, the why behind the what of your work is a story. It is the leader sharing stories of experience. So I now trust my leader because my leader talked about a time when they stumbled, what they learned. And now I feel like I have a little bit of freedom to innovate and fail. And so it really is an ecosystem of storytelling to create connection to four things. You've got to feel connected to the work you do, the stuff on your desk, the people you are supposed to be collaborating with, right? You don't have to be besties, but at the minimum, you have to be able to work together. Your leader. Do I trust my leader? Can I share if I screwed up and save the company money because I can admit to those things, right? And then to the company itself. Is this just some concrete building we work at and I can swap it out for another one? Or is it somewhere where I believe? I believe in the mission. I believe where we're going. You have to have connection in all four areas. And there's different types of stories to create that.
Yeah. Well, going back to your point about just communicating more or communicating better, I don't remember where it was, if I was listening to a podcast or read an article, but I mean, and I started to think about myself and my communication or communication I draft for leaders, right? And how often leaders are like, I want them to trust what I'm communicating to them. And I'm like, the trust does not begin with this communication. The trust begins with those four things you talked about from the beginning of their journey within that organization, or the kind of micro moments along the way where they're like, I have a decision to make here. I either trust or I don't trust, or I believe or I don't believe, or I'm going to change or I'm not, or I'm going to be connected to the work or I'm not, right? There's those tiny little moments that build up over time. It's like getting annoyed with your spouse, right? Sometimes you blow up over something super small and you're like, there were 5 other things I probably should have talked to you about, but they seemed really small, but they created a story in my head about this situation or who you are, what you're trying to do, or your intention or whatever. So that's really important, is it's not just the leader writing a really good email.
It's so true. Or that
me, it's not going to happen again, or trust me, this reorg was really hard, but right. It's happens long before that.
That's so true. And that's why there's 4 different areas of connection, because there will be a reorg. Okay, that's a great example. There will be a reorg. All of a sudden, I'm not feeling so great about leadership because why would they disrupt us? And so the connection kind of goes down in that area, right? I don't know. They say that they want us to thrive, but now they're doing this reorg and I don't feel comfortable. But I still believe in my company. I love who I work with, and I really like the work I do, right? So if those connections are strong, there's tolerance for disruption in this other place. Now, it has to correct and all that, but that's why this is a living, breathing ecosystem. And yes, I mean, trust is the word here. If you don't trust your leader, it kind of all goes out the window. People quit their leaders, right? Not the company, but their leaders.
Totally. Yep. And as a leader, you don't have to be for everyone. You know what I mean? I think there's this desire to be everything to everyone. And it's no, that's not the way it works. You just need to be human so people know what to expect.
So well put. You need to just be human.
Yeah. Okay. So talk through this structure that you have in the story effect, right? Of how you teach leaders. It's not just you being in advertising, you being this beautifully creative brain and being able to articulate stories. Everyone has access to this to a degree. So what does that look like? How do you go about that? I'd love to know a little bit more.
Yeah. So, I wrote a book to help leaders understand how to understand this, philosophically, but then use it and meet them where they are and not have to learn how to become expert storytellers or performers. This is really not, there are books that teach you how to be a great speaker, how to be a great, storyteller on stage. That's not what this is. It already exists. So why would I attempt to do that again? It's really, and it's not all on the leader to tell stories. So the way I kind of break it down, as I mentioned, it's 4 areas. It's connection to the company, to the work we do, to the leader, and to each other. And there are certain story types. So for example, when you're connecting people to their work, it's not just here's what we need to do, but here's why we need to do it and how you are a significant part of that. And I'm not talking about, so sometimes it's dialed up to a locker room speech because we're in the 11th hour and it's make or break time and we're in the trenches. And so you really got to dial it up. But sometimes it's simply, listen, this has a condensed timeline. And, I know that that's not ideal, but we love this client. Like, she's amazing. We all love her and everybody's nodding. And this will really make her look good in her new role. So if we could get this presentation together for her as quick as possible, like, we will be her hero. Like, you guys with me, right? All of a sudden your heart's involved. Like, that is an example of telling a why story. And there's lots of ways to think about that. But connecting people to the work is the why behind the what. Connecting people to each other, those are those personal stories. Creating time and space as a leader for people to get to know each other, not what they do, but who they are. Who they are. And by the way, and this, working in HR, as a leader, when you create time and space for people to talk about who they are outside of what they do, and by the way, I am not talking about therapy sessions or really, we're not getting into our childhood trauma.
Yeah, or push to get information if somebody's unwilling to share.
No, it could be as light as tell me something about your kids, your pets, or your passion. Like, really, it could be in that frame of, but when you do that as a leader, you learn things about your team that you will never learn on an engagement survey. You will never learn in their interview because you're going over their resume. That is what they do. But you learn who they are. Why does that matter to you? You don't have to be a person who is about the people and cares about people. But when you learn what drives them and makes them tick, when you're in the trenches, you can dial those things up and say, hey, I know you are big on transparency. That is part of something you value. So we have to do X, Y, Z because that's going to give the customer a real clear sense of what they're getting from us, right? All of a sudden they are personally engaged. So connection to the work is the story about the why. Connection to each other are personal stories. Connection to the leader, that's where a leader, as I mentioned earlier, shares stories of experience. It gives people permission to not be perfect, to try something, to innovate. You can't have innovation without courage, without risk, right? Otherwise, they're going to be compliant and they're just going to do what's required and leave at the end of the day. So sharing stories of experience. And I give examples in the book, but, hey guys, I did a project like this at my last company and I got to be honest with you, I bombed it. Like, I really made a mess of this. Here's what happened. Here's what I learned. And, like, if you run into something like that, come to me. Like, we'll work it out. All of a sudden, I have trust in my leader. And then connection with the company is stories of purpose. Story, like, what is not the what we're setting out to do, but why are we doing it? And how does your personal why connect to our bigger purpose? We are out to make an impact on the world. You believe in this. How do those two things connect? So how can I find my story in the story? It's a lot, right? But that ecosystem of things creates connection in those 4 areas.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm certain you have leaders coming to you of like, either leaders saying, well, my why doesn't really connect to the why of the organization. Or like, as I've gone through this, I'm learning that there's people on my team who they're just transacting, right? They're just doing the thing and we're working out of scarcity because we don't think we can go find another job you know what I mean? There's like all kinds of like external factors that like influence how people show up and share. So how do you, is there a like secret sauce to breakthrough?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, this is not so absolute that you're going to win everybody over and we're all going to be sharing stories and like so I'm not delusional in thinking that that's the case either. And I do describe sort of a spectrum of things. So, you know, earlier we talked about like what if, I'm not comfortable kind of getting vulnerable. Kids, pets, passion. But even if you're not at that point, there's always every single human being cares about something. And maybe it's just I care about being a really decent employee here. That seems dry on the surface, but that's where they are. So kind of meet them where they are. Well, great. How can I enable you to be a decent employee here? That's okay. So I would say you have to really meet this is a human living, breathing concept we're talking about, not a formulaic, well, I tried it and it didn't work. Like 3 people were, opted out. But I've done enough of this work and, leading storytelling workshops. I've been on stage and actually threw the mic to people in the audience and people who I did not think were gonna participate, and they did. I've done this enough to know that every single person has a story. Every single person needs connection. You just have to meet them where they are.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I was having a conversation yesterday with somebody that I used to work with. And she is, potentially looking for somewhere else to go, right? Like another opportunity. She's been where she's at for a while. And she said to me, what's really hard, Kristi, is, a lot of people look at my resume and say, why have you had a similar job for several years? Like, what's wrong with you? And she's like, I love what I do. I'm really good at what I do. And I love to dig in where people don't normally want to dig in because they're trying to get promoted and figure out a way to make it work. And I was like, I love that you know who you are and that so talking about meeting them where they're at, like I also think leaders have these, or employees, right, have these ideas in their head where it goes back to kind of beliefs of what should be, of who you should be or how you should act. They like should themselves to death. And instead of like opening the kimono and saying like, this is who I am and this is what I want to do. And this is like how I want to show up or how I will show up. And I like so appreciated that of this conversation I had because I'm like, I love that you know who you are and what you want to be doing in an organization and that you don't want to lead a team and that you don't want to just be on this promotion track. Like, cause that doesn't get you going. Doesn't get you fired up, doesn't get you excited. Like at the core of who you are, what you want to be doing and why. And that's amazing. Because most people don't. And they think if I want to get more money, I need to be promoted and I'm going to go do this thing and I'm going to go do that thing. And it probably leads to these leaders being in spots where they won't be vulnerable because they have imposter syndrome or whatever, right? They're like, I shouldn't even be in this spot. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I don't want to tell anybody.
You are so right. First of all, that is a characteristic I admire most about people. I love to meet people who are so comfortable in their skin, know exactly who they are. It's so refreshing because I suffer from imposter syndrome. I've talked about it a ton, probably to death on my podcast. Because truthfully, like I interview as you do, some really powerhouse leaders and I'm like, "Did you ever feel this way?" And like, "How did you overcome?" Because I wanna know the secret. So I love that. And that so what you're tapping into is really how my book it all kind of backs into this little surprise at the end, which is and spoiler alert, but which is the best way to really understand how to do all of this, facilitate all this as a leader, is to first get straight with your story. Because then if you get really introspective, you understand yourself, what makes you tick, what you value, how you came to be, what you messed up on and what you learned. You start collecting those stories that you're willing to share and you really do that work. You start to see people differently and you understand people differently. Your empathy goes up for people.
Totally. And then you also understand like what needs to kind of cut out of what you're doing, right? Like either the work that you're doing, the people you're interacting with. I'm not saying like go call up a friend and be like, we can't be friends anymore. But you start to understand like, am I in this as me or am I in this as I'm trying to be someone else?
Oh, yes. So you're tapping into, there's a great book. It's called Learned Excellence. Eric Potterat is one of the authors, and he was on my podcast. He was the Navy SEALs first performance psychologist. So, whoa, I know, like top of the food chain, right? And he's just an incredible, he's an
I'm going to
incredible
have to
human being.
link that podcast so people can listen to it because I bet that was fascinating.
It is, the subject is, and he is. One of the things that I talked about in that episode, and I put it in my book because I am obsessed with this idea, is identity versus reputation. Are you going out into the world acting on your identity, who you really are, what you really believe, what makes you tick, all of those things, or your reputation, what other people expect you to be? That's the performative side of you. I love thinking about that because I, as a ex ballerina, am always in performance mode, reputation mode. Well, everybody wants me to show up and say the cool thing or make them laugh or whatever. I'm always there. But wait a minute, who am I really? And like, what would it look like if I showed up in my identity?
Right. Well, and sometimes it feels good when you show up as this like performative person. You're like, I like the feedback I'm getting. This feels good. This gets me excited. This makes me want to do more. But there's also a very big spectrum to that on the other side of like, but am I an imposter? Am I doing this for me? Am I like, is it bringing me joy? It's like, it feels good and it feels so bad all at the same time.
Yeah,
right?
it's an energy suck. Even whether you're an introvert, extrovert, when you are out proving your reputation, it is a major drain on your energy. And so this is so good for leaders to think about too. It's like, yes, there are certain requirements of being a leader in their various roles, but ultimately as a people leader of human beings, and you are a human being, what does it look like if you show up as a human version of yourself with your flaws and with your questions about things? And again, you have to show strength, and you have to help people believe and all those things, but also, you're not going to lose your business acumen if you show up as a human.
Right. You'll actually get more belief in you, and people will start to share things with you that might actually build some business acumen too, right? With you, with the others on the team. Yeah. That's such an interesting. I had a conversation with my 16-year-old about this because in high school, everything is about like who you are and what people think of you. But then when you start to act based on how you think other people will receive that or what they'll think of you, and make decisions based on that, she found herself in a very interesting spot of like, but I don't like it for me. It was like it's this identity reputation thing. And I was like, well, why are you making decisions based on what other people will think? And she's like, because reputation management. And I was like, tell me more. And she's like, well, she's like a high on disc. She's like a high I, like wants to be liked. Right. And not to the degree of like making really bad decisions, but actually like to showing up as almost like wanting to be perfect versus this is who I am. I'm great in some areas and I am not great in other areas, but that's just who I am. And it was like a very interesting couple of weeks of a conversation of like, what would actually happen if you made a decision based on who you are versus what those other people are going to think of you. And what we got down to, honestly, of how to work through this. And this might be, I don't know if this is just for high schoolers or it might be for leaders too. She had a tendency to like overshare information of like her emotion, and then without like fully talking it through. And I think it's probably like a maturity thing. And so then people had an opinion on everything she was doing versus her kind of processing for herself and then sharing what she wanted and who she was. And so she was like, well, I've already shared that. So if I show up like this, then they're going to be like this. And then, I mean, oh my goodness. And I could see that happening inside an organization too, right? With somebody who isn't right with themselves first. You kind of show up as like the high school version of you trying to impress other people at the cost of you not being you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. You so right. First of all, it's amazing to have that conversation with a 16-year-old because those are the years you really can figure a lot
Hopefully I
out.
nailed it, but who knows? I'll
No, I
find out a
love the
few
way you're
years from now.
no, it's really important to have. It's even just if she can't get there in practice, if she just thinks about that and has awareness about that, I think that's such a beautiful thing early because if not, you can carry that into your adult life and then you get into the workplace. And honestly, it is an energy suck. It's also like a fast track to burnout. It people pleasing and performing, and it's like it's almost like you've ever gone to a ballet or a Broadway show. It's like they give it their all, they leave it all out on the stage, and then they're backstage like panting and like, oh, can't wait to get this costume off. Like you don't want to live a life feeling that way. And by the way, your authentic, quirky, imperfect, weird self is going to be more valuable than ever in this AI era of perfection. You know what I mean? And by the way, I'm not anti AI at all, but I think there needs to be an awareness that I mean, you can see it on LinkedIn. You can see it on the LinkedIn posts. All of a sudden, everybody's a really witty, sharp writer. No diss. I get it. I get it. I get it. However, you're starting to feel some sameness, your quirks, your little, background weirdness, your sense of humor, it's all going to become really precious and awesome if you lean into it.
Total. You know what? That's a really good point because again, it goes back to like the heart and soul, right? Like a computer doesn't have a heart and soul. And there are really great things about AI that I think are going to be huge problem solvers for some of the things. Like I even see in the HR space, like sometimes HR gets bogged down with things that are very transactional, right? And so it becomes very administrative. I think there is an element of AI that can take on all of that very, very perfectly. And it couples with a human being who has a heart and a soul, right? That can give that emotion and like help people understand things that a computer just couldn't. I'm with you on that one.
Completely. And if you want to, I know you like to give people the tactical pieces on your podcast. If you want to experiment as a leader, this is an easy one. Next time you are in front of your team and you're kicking off a project or initiative, a strategy, try it both ways. Do one where you basically give them the what. Tell them this is what we need. This is when say it in your friendly, personable, regular way, but give them the what. Tell them what you need, when you need it by, and I'm really counting on you guys, and let me know if you have questions and kick off the project. There is probably a level of compliance and they will get the job done and all will be well if you have a relatively healthy organization. Then try to give them a backstory, a why, on the next one. Tell them why it matters, what impact it's going to make on the company, on the people. And by the way, impact can be financial. Money's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it is. Right? It could say we will hit our quarter and that's good for our earnings and it's good for our bonuses. Like whatever it is, okay? But give them the why. And maybe, maybe it's more personal. Maybe it's, hey, we're developing software so that patients, when they leave the hospital and they've got all these, medicines to take and therapies to do, and they don't know where to start, our software will hold their hand through the process so they feel better quicker. Really get into the why behind the what. Not only will the outcome improve, I'm betting money on it, but also just watch their faces, feel the vibe in the room. Back to your vibe. Feel how it feels, how energized everyone is, how passionate they become about their work. It's a very simple gut check on, is this all fluff or is this really something I should
Yeah.
think about?
Yeah, you might see people like actually put their phones down and look up from their phones, or like, oh, you've captured my attention. I want to hear more, right? Or there might be people, this on the other side of it too, who opt out because they're like, I don't connect with this. And that's okay too, because so many times leaders are like struggling to climb uphill with certain people on their team. And it's really a matter of like, they don't connect. And that's okay. Like, I think we need to get out of the mindset of like, it's bad if somebody isn't a fit. I hear that all the time. Like, can I just tell them they're not a fit? I'm like, you can. Like, I mean, hopefully it's a bigger conversation than that and one that isn't surprising them. But that's totally okay. And they should go somewhere where they do feel like they fit because they need to be met where they're at, like you were saying earlier, so that they can do their best work, show up as their best self and who they truly are, not who they're trying to be.
Yes, I that's such a good point. And in the middle ground with what you said, and I totally agree is, we're my husband and I have started watching Big Bang Theory from the beginning. It's just such a cute show. It's fun to watch while we're eating dinner, and I'm thinking about Sheldon. So Sheldon, if you're listening and you don't know Big Bang Theory, like where have you been? Like that everybody knows the show. Sheldon would probably not respond to an emotionally connective story about the impact of the work. But, and you could say, well, maybe this isn't for him, and that could be true. But he really wants to solve complex scientific problems. So turn on that switch for him in particular. This is where it's not a team of employees, it's individual human beings that you can meet where they are as a
For
leader.
sure. Yeah, yeah. So ditch the engagement survey and like the committee that's told you to go do all these things like a certain way for every single person. Like we are uniquely designed individually. So go do individual things for individual people. Otherwise, you're only going to probably hit 1 out of 10.
That's right. And you've probably seen this too. The research is showing that there is an expectation for a more individualized experience at work. And I know that makes a lot of people nervous because how do we scale that? You really want me to offer an individual journey for 700 people. How do we scale that? You scale that by enabling this culture of leaders who can meet people where they are in absence of you. It can cascade down. It can cascade down. There are culture champions. There are managers, then leaders, then directors, right? So it is scalable, but it does start from the top. It
Yeah.
does.
Oh, I interviewed somebody long ago on my podcast, and he has a technology company that's like in 8 countries. I think it's like 800 people now. And he said exactly, he's like, I have to give the autonomy to the leaders that I have in this organization to do things differently. He's like, my accounting group doesn't want to do the same thing as my developers want to do when it comes to like getting them excited about the work they're doing, the things they do in their free time. It just is different. And it's different in the US versus Australia or South Africa or wherever they're at. Like it is very, specific to that culture or that team dynamic or that leader. So yes, the individualized, and actually AI should make this simpler because you can consolidate data and understand things. Like if you want to take a data-driven approach, you can take all that data, dump it into AI and get like an analysis very quickly. Now, I would caution like make sure it's right and feels right and is true and correct because it's not always right. But that there's an element of like crunching data much more quickly to visibly see maybe where you can go and start.
Yeah, that's a
To some
great
degree.
point. I never thought about that piece of the AI integration creating a more human experience. You're right. You can take so much, and it doesn't have to be engagement survey data in the sense of numbers and what boxes people checked. It can really be, open field questions, and it can really distill it down. That's very smart. I love
Yeah.
that.
Or here's what like these are all the disc profiles of my people on my team. Like, what do I do with this? Like, is it what's one thing they all have in common? And then it It can help inform how you then go act to some degree, right? So it's a positive way to use technology that we have at our fingertips versus just like looking at it as, I keep hearing like, it's just going to replace my job. I'm like, oh my gosh, stop. If you think that, it will.
Right. Right. Or you can become an expert at leveraging it to make your job better and you better. There's that side too.
Exactly. Okay. So as we kind of like wrap up here, I want to understand from you, like if there's one thing people can do as they walk away from this to just get started to move things in the right direction next, what do you say is like that one thing they just go do? They don't need a budget. They don't need a committee. They don't need an engagement survey. They don't need anything, but they can just take action.
Yes. So if you zoom out as a leader, if you zoom out and look at your days and your weeks and your quarters, there are multiple places and times where you're communicating. Where could those moments turn from pure communication to true storytelling and story enabling? So take inventory of all those moments, your one-on-ones, maybe you're contributing to a newsletter. By the way, newsletters. Oh, it's been a great summer so far. And like nobody reads them. Story moment. Like you can really get creative there. But like newsletters, one-on-ones, team meetings, maybe you're a leader who does coffee chats with your employees. Maybe you should start. But really taking inventory of all the places where you communicate anyways, because we don't want to add to your plate. You're a busy leader. That you could turn it into a story moment. Maybe I'm not talking the whole time. Maybe I'm asking questions. I'm deeply listening. So I would say that is baseline. If you are so new to this that it freaks you out, like I cannot possibly begin to understand storytelling. Number one, like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of great books that teach you how to do it, but become a story collector. Start to see the world, your world experience, and what makes for really great stories that could teach people, inspire people, connect people, help people believe either things that I'm doing or things that I'm observing in the hallways, and start to become a story collector. Use your notes app in your phone and write them down. Like it's okay to have a cheat sheet. You don't have to be the most charismatic person in the world or speaker or performer, and write them down and then start to practice. The next time you're in a one-on-one, share a little bit about you. It could be personal, it could be professional, and then ask some questions of the person in front of you. Just start to see how it feels a little bit. So I would say inventory, collecting stories worthy of sharing, and then practicing very lightly, very little moments.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that story collecting. That is how I feel when I listen to podcasts. I have a notes, like a running tab in my notes app of just like points that people make or words that they say or a story that they tell, and I'll just write it in there. Sometimes I go back and I'm like, I have no idea what I meant by that. I'm going to like do a little research on myself of like what I think I actually meant by that. But yeah, and then I can pull back to that, whether it's for a LinkedIn post or it's like as I'm talking to somebody, or I wanted to go back and remember that to share it with somebody else, right? That's a great story collecting. I love that.
Story collecting. Why not?
Yeah.
And I'll share, by the way, I am not talking about you have to be up there for 20 minutes or in front of somebody for 20 minutes telling a story. It could be a 3-second story. We just had a client presentation, and part of what I was presenting was to help start an initiative for leaders to make a pledge, a commitment on what they're going to do to create a culture of belonging and with an action plan against it. And I had all these kind of measurable moments and story sharing moments, and it was a lot more elaborate than I think the initial ask was. To help everyone personally on the call, personally understand why I would make it more complicated than it needs to be, I started with this. This is literally an example of a story you could tell. It's February 2nd. I bet every single person on this call at some level had some New Year's resolutions. And I would also bet that some of them by now are already out the window Because if we just write down a commitment, a pledge, and we don't do anything with it, it's very easy for it to be a aspirational intention and not an action, right? So I'm going to talk through kind of a system to turn what we say we want to do into what we actually do and how we can measure that. That did not take much time, but just bringing in the concept of New Year's resolution, starting off with that story, got everybody's head in the right spot to then understand the rest of it. That's all I'm talking about.
Yeah, because it's like a relatable topic, right? Like, this isn't something that just one person would know. This is something that is out in the world for everybody to know.
Right.
Yeah.
Like we all get into the story in our heads. Like we all imagine ourselves on the 31st, maybe with the champagne going, oh, shoot, like I better write down 3 things I'm going to do this week, which is what I did. Right. But with all the right intentions and discipline, but like they go out the window unless you have like a 90-day plan and all that. Right. So, just sharing that little story moment. So it doesn't have to be this full blown, you're not taking on something that can't fit into your schedule.
Right. It's not a sermon that you need to deliver every Sunday. Yeah.
No. But if your company is on fire and you're in the trenches and it's like you've got to get people to believe, that might call for something really robust and like you to really deliver, and that's okay too. So that's why I say it's an ecosystem. There's a scale of things. It's always on. It's a living and breathing thing. And so you have to show up different ways for different circumstances. Some people aren't going to love getting too personal. So you kind of keep it at their professional level. That's okay too. So there's no absolutes in this. It's really, but essentially all of it is making you and the people around you more human.
Totally. And one thing to take from all of it is, in order to be this way, you have to be present in the moment, right? Because you have to understand like what's going on, who's around you, what people are up to, and observe certain things. And if you're not there, you're going to miss it.
Yes. Present in the moment and empathetic in the moment. It's not about you. It's about the people that you serve. What are they feeling? What are they afraid of? What is in it for them? Why should they care? If their hearts aren't in it, you have to give their hearts an invite.
Totally. Oh my gosh. Well, that is a great way to end our conversation today. Give your people's heart an invite to care and want to be there and connect. So thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciate you. I'm going to link your book and the podcast you mentioned and the night agency and all the things that we talked about in the show notes, so anybody can access those and access you for all the greatness that you are. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to talk with you too. I loved you from our first conversation. It's really a privilege to be on your show now. And it was so fun. Thank you. And we get each other. This is not the end of us. Yes.
Yeah. And that's a wrap on today's conversation with Danielle. A reminder that a vibe is the emotional truth of a story. It's what people feel long after the words fade. So pay attention to the stories happening around you at work. What stories are shaping your culture? What stories are building trust? And which ones might be breaking it? Stories shape how we see our leaders, our teams, and even ourselves. When leaders are willing to share real stories, trust grows, connection grows, culture changes. So maybe this week, don't worry about saying the perfect thing. Just be real, be present, invite people in. Because culture isn't built by policies. It's built by the stories we live and tell every day. Your vibe is already telling a story. The only question is whether it's the one you intend to tell. So stay curious, stay courageous, and keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.